Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina Smarecki. I am the events manager here at Nuspire, and I'll be your host for today's live session. We're really excited to be here today with a wonderful partner of ours, Qualys. We have some great content for you that is all about simplifying patch management. If you do have questions during the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A tab, and we'll try to leave a few minutes at the end for those questions. Also, there's a different tab for the chat function. Go ahead and use the chat tab and let us know where you're joining in from today. And just so everyone knows, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to watch the recording of this session. So at this time, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today, Jeremy and Eran. Jeremy is the Director of Security Design and Integration on Nuspire's implementation team. He has over a decade of experience in cybersecurity and has specialized in being a hands-on implementation engineer for hundreds of customers utilizing countless security technologies. Jeremy also has a background in teaching IT and computer networking, spending 10 years as an instructor. And Eran is the Senior Director of Product Management for Endpoint Remediation at Qualys. He leads a team tasked with helping customers improve their security posture through cross-platform vulnerability remediations. And he has more than 20 plus years of product management and computer science experience working in IT and security. And now I'll go ahead and kick it over to Jeremy to kick things off.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So high level, what we're going to be talking about in today's webinar, we're going to go through a poll question to get us started. After that, we're going to go over some information about vulnerability and patch management. We're going to talk about manual patching risks. We'll talk about what patch management looks like in the real world with both an automated approach and a manual approach. We'll talk about where to focus patch management program improvements. We'll talk about the best practices for a systematic approach to patching. And we'll talk about how automation plays into that. And we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So the next thing that we'll go into here is our poll question for the webinar. The poll question will pop up on your screen. And the question is, which best reflects your current patch management process? And is that manual patching, a combo of manual and automated, third party manages the patching, a combo of manual, automated, and third party, or just something else? So everybody just take a few minutes or take a few seconds rather, answer this question, and then we'll go over the results here.
I see quite a few people already voting.
Awesome.
All right, I think that was good. Well, I think I'll go ahead and end the poll here and we can share the results.
Awesome. So awesome. It seems like either a combo floats up to the top in both circumstances. So we have the manual and the automated, and then a combo of manual, automated, and third party. So that's in line with, what we see a lot of times from kind of the service provider end of things. In that, with some applications, it's very simple and easy to get and that automated strategy. With some third-party applications, it's not as easy. And then when you bring the third parties that actually do patch management into play, a lot of times what you're looking at there is, at least in our perspective, it's making sure when you go out and you sign up for technology that it's either a service or a product that you go in like a SaaS space or something like that, making sure that that product or service comes with the software lifecycle or the patch management lifecycle is super important too. So the fact that those two bubble up to the top makes sense to me. And it's surprising to see how many we have there, 13% still with the manual patching. I think we'll get in and we'll illuminate, you know, some of the awesome capabilities that are out there nowadays for automated patching and marrying up vulnerability and patch management data to really make things easier on you, make life easier. So that's cool information. Awesome. So just continuing on here, the next thing that we'll hit is this quote here, which we thought was interesting. We thought it would be a good way to kind of kick off what we're going to talk to you about here. And that is 57% of cyber attack victims report their breaches could have been prevented by installing an available patch. And 34% of those victims knew of the vulnerability, but didn't take action, right? So the way that we like to think about patch management is it's all about getting the right information in front of the people that, you know, can implement patching and can solve those vulnerabilities as quickly as possible. And then also having both the technology and the business processes in place in order to remediate the vulnerabilities as quick as possible. So just a good quote to kind of showcase the importance of what we're here to talk about today. So what we're going to hand off to now, we're going to hand off to kind of look at the technology side of things. So I'll hand this off to Eran, and he'll go through a lot of the great automated patching and patch management strategies from the technology perspective.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yep.
Okay, so what I'll do, I'll take you through some of the findings that our threat research team found or let me rephrase this. So in 2022, a few months ago, actually, we released a report with a lot of information about what happened in 2022. And I want to summarize something for you and correlate it to the importance of patching and walk through automation and other ways of what we learn and how you can implement patching to be more successful. So that's the first fact, right? 2022, we had 25,000 vulnerabilities released in the year. What's interesting is if you look at the data, from those 25,000, only about 8,000 were actually exploitable, meaning there was a theoretical exploit available for those vulnerabilities, 8,000 out of those 25,000. What's even more interesting is only 159 of those exploited vulnerabilities, somebody wrote the code, somebody weaponized them and wrote the code and upload them to GitHub or any other place. So it was actually something you can use to exploit the vulnerability. So about 8,000 are theoretically exploited, 159, there is an exploit, weaponized code ready to be used. And you can look to the right, there's so many other things. So 93 of them are known in the CISA list. 73 are named vulnerabilities. So those are the one that hits the news. 28 exploited by threat actor that actually been exploited, 23 by malware, 18 were actually used by ransomware. But this data is very interesting because you can see that you have to prioritize, right? And even though so many vulnerabilities were introduced, only 159 are actually the one that you should focus on first. And I say first because nobody guarantees that the rest will not be exploited in your environment, but at least we know as a fact that we have to focus on the 159. Let me move forward. What's more interesting is based on our findings, you can see on the left that it takes on average 20 days for a vulnerability to be weaponized. Then about 30 days for us to fix the vulnerability, to patch it or remediate, okay? Even from the vulnerability that were remediated, only 57, 58% were actually remediated. The rest are still not remediated. And everything is based on anonymous data that we collect at Qualys for many years. Okay, so you can see that everything leads to this new slide, to this build-up slide. What happened is a vulnerability is disclosed 0 day, right? as we said, 90 days on average, it takes the vulnerability to be weaponized. 27 days after that, CISA adds this vulnerability on average again to its list. And then 40 days after, that's where CISA says you have to patch it. So if you're a government entity, you have to patch it 48 days after. Okay, so it gives you, that's the mandate window of the government. But what's interesting here, if you put the data of the 30 days, which is the average patch date, so most customer will patch those vulnerabilities 30 days after it was released, it gives the bad guys for those specific vulnerabilities, or the vulnerability that we know they are weaponized and are actually used in the field. Most bad guys, basically it gives 11 days for the bad guys to exploit this vulnerability in your environment. Okay, so we have to respond faster. Now, if you look at the vulnerabilities themselves, the vulnerabilities that the top 10 vulnerabilities, weaponized vulnerabilities, again, we are focusing on the vulnerabilities that are weaponized and are used by the bad guys. If you look at the data from 2022 and we look at the top 10, you can see a very common pattern here. All of them are Microsoft or Chrome, which means those should be easily remediated by many tools, right? Most of us should have a good automation to take care of Microsoft, everything Chrome, everything third party, but Chrome, as you can see, is a big contender here. Now, those are the top 10 vulnerabilities. But what we also found in the data is that the threat actors are diversing. So not in the masses, but we specifically look at a specific group called initial access brokers. Those guys, what they do, they are penetrating to your environment, and what they'll do, they'll sell the access to others, so they can install the ransomware, they can take the action and steal the information. So they are just initiating the access, they are just hacking into your environment, and then they sell it. Now, what we saw is very interesting. The way they're actually doing it, what they're doing is they're leveraging different type of vulnerabilities, not the vulnerabilities you can easily automate, not the Chrome, the Microsoft, the easy ones to patch. They're actually targeting very, very unique vulnerabilities. And if you look at the data, for those vulnerability on average, it takes 45 days for us to remediate compared to 17 days for the Windows and Chrome. And the patch rate, meaning how much how many of those vulnerabilities do we actually fix in our environment, you can see we actually fix less. Okay, so 68% compared to the 82% that are Windows and Chrome. So we are more efficient in fixing those Windows and Chrome compared to those one-offs vulnerabilities that those initial access broker are using. And probably that is the reason they're attacking those vulnerabilities, because we are not doing as good of a job in fixing them as we do with the Chrome and Windows. And that leads me to the first conclusion and the data that proves those conclusions. First conclusion that I want to share based on the data is that automation is key. If you think, remember, Chrome and Microsoft should and are automated, or should be automated. Let's say, I hope in your environment they are also automated. Based on our data, we saw that if we compare customers that are using manual patching to fix those Microsoft and Chromes, we can find that if you look at the guys that are doing automation, they are almost 90% faster. 43% faster in remediating those vulnerabilities and 90% better patch rate. So they are patching 89% more than the ones that are using manual. Automation help you fix more problems and do it faster. That is the most important thing to remember from that slide. And that's based on 2022 data. Now, we can see that automation helps you be more efficient. So why aren't we starting with the low-hanging fruits? And one of the biggest conclusions, when I talk to many of our customers, one of the biggest conclusions is start with low-hanging fruit. You can see, based on the data, you can see that the ones that do start with low-hanging fruits are much faster and patching more. But when I talk about low-hanging fruit, I'm not only talking about the Microsoft and the Chromes. You can see in this CISA report, the Firefox, the Apples, the iTunes, all those are low-hanging fruits. And the best way to look at this is what I call smart automation. And here we're drilling one level further and we're starting to talk about more practical. Okay, because the way we look at it is we understand that automation helps, but at the same time, we all know automation is not a magic bullet, and we cannot just push a button and fix everything, right? There's consequences. What happens if I automate something and I break the application? Then I'm going to lose business. I'm going to lose money. So that's the reason I'm calling it smart automation. Smart automation means I'm going to automate where I should, and from a security risk perspective. So we're going to find the application that if I automate will decrease my security risk the most. As an example, right? You saw in the report, Chrome is of course one of them. But most customers will also find Firefox, and I also find VLC in iTunes in environments. And there are reports that will show you which one of your the low-hanging fruits that you can easily automate and reduce the most risk. Okay, and you should focus on those. Now, always I recommend for the security team and the IT team to sit together, look at those reports, figure out based on the reports which are the third-party applications, the applications that are easiest from the IT perspective. So there are less operation risk. If I patch iTunes, and you probably will find iTunes in your environment, and you'll find it a lot. If you patch iTunes, what can go wrong? Worst case scenario, some of your users will not be able to stream music. That IT can handle, right? IT has no problem with that. IT will probably have problem with patching Java automated. We don't want to do it. So we want to do it smartly. We want to create smart automation that understand the environment, the specific environment, analyze the risk, and based on the security risk on one hand and the operational risk on the other hand, take the decision what we can automate. The more you can automate, the better you're going to be in protecting your environment. And you saw the data that actually says specifically, if you're automating, you're 43% faster with your MTTR, mean time to remediate. Now, the next level of automation is risk-based automation. What do I mean risk-based automation? Think about it like that. You will have vulnerability that are currently leveraged by ransomware. You will have vulnerability that are currently leveraged by other types of attacks, right? You can create rules, and you should create rules that take risk into consideration. Basically say, if there's a new vulnerability for that is actually used in a campaign right now by ransomware, I want to take care of it and remediate it automatically. I don't even want to wait. Just go ahead and automatically do it. Now, of course, you cannot do it on your mission critical application. You can do it on your desktop or laptops. It's much easier, but that takes you to the next level because you can respond even before the risk is valid in your environment. So automation is key. But it's not all. Remember those access broker, right? This initial access broker. Those guys are not targeting your the easy to patch application. They're not targeting your Windows. They're not targeting your Chromes. They're targeting specific application. So of course we need to continue with our vulnerability management program and prioritize our vulnerability and go ahead and patch them, right? But there's something missing here because when you take a vulnerability and I don't call it even patch, I call it remediation. Because first of all, the first thing to remember is a vulnerability is not a patch. When you talk to IT guys, they'll always, think about this as the same thing, patch and vulnerability. It's not. A vulnerability can be mapped to many patches. You may need several patches to fix one vulnerability. Even worse, you may need a patch and a configuration change, right? The registry key change or something like that. And there's also a lot of supersedence going on. So for an old vulnerability, you may need a new patch. All this logic is usually done manually in many companies. How do I do this mapping? How do I know exactly what to do with each vulnerability? And there are tools we can automate all those things. All those things should be automated, not must be automated, in my opinion, because usually it just saves you time. There's time that you or your IT should not spend in mapping what do I need to do to fix the vulnerability in the context of my environment. It's not generic. In this specific asset, what are the actions that I need to do to fix the vulnerability? Okay, and those things should be automated and will make your life much easier because it will allow your IT to respond faster and will not require your IT to spend too much time on doing the research that can be automated for them. So that's another important point. Now, risk is everywhere. I'll go very quickly about this slide because I assume that everybody knows after the pandemic, everybody knows that everybody works from home now, every type of device, Windows, Mac, Linux for their servers. There are tons of third-party application vulnerabilities out there. You have to deal with everything. and you have to deal with all the type of third-party application, different OSs, and no matter where the device is, either it's on-prem, in the cloud, in your environment, in the airport, doesn't matter, because the bad guys doesn't care. And you have to have a very unified solution and centralized way to deal with everything, so you don't have to switch between different solutions for roaming devices on Mac, and then you have a roaming devices on Windows, and then you deal Linux differently. The reason you want one unified tool, it just saves you time. The more time you save, the more time you have to do the actual work and fix those vulnerabilities. And last but not least, IT and security team harmony. And in the title of this webinar, we also said without replacing your current solution, and that's something important, because secure or vulnerability management is the security, let's call it a problem, or the responsibility is the security team. Actually deploying the patch and fixing the vulnerability is the IT team in most cases, or the application teams. Okay, those guys are usually, or depends on the side of the size of you guys as a customer, but they're not always working with the same tools, and sometimes are not talking to each other in the way they should. Which means you need to unify it as much as you can. The more you feel unification, the more you talk to each other, the more you communicate with each other, and the more the tools help you do that, the better your integration will be, and the workflow from detection all the way to remediation will be smoother. So bottom line, you'll be able to fix more vulnerabilities faster. Okay. Now, one of the things to remember that most of the customers, or most of the customers that I've talked to, have SCCM or WSUS for dealing with Windows patching. That's great. That's a good tool. Some like to replace it. Some like to add more tools on top of it. But there are tools. We have the tools that allows you to sit on top of those WSUS or Microsoft tools and fix all the other things that those cannot touch. All the automation that we discussed, all the third-party application, the different type of OSs, everything can sit on top of what you have today. So you don't have to rip and replace. You can actually enhance what you have today. But the idea here is to help you bridge the gap between your security teams and IT teams, make the entire workflow as smooth as possible. And just to, as my last slide, remember we had initially we had a slide that shows how much time it takes from vulnerability disclosure all the way to remediation. If you do optimize and if you do automation, I call it proactive automation, because you're going to automate and fix the vulnerability even before the vulnerability is discovered, right? Because you automate it every day, every new Chrome patches. If there's a new one, just remove it. Every time there's a new iTunes patch, just deploy it, right? No question us going and deploying it, okay? So automation, if you do that, you'll be able to address a vulnerability even before it's been weaponized. So it actually, in reality, it doesn't introduce a risk to your environment. Now, for the ones that are weaponized and you have to prioritize, yes, with all the mapping and with making sense of what the vulnerability, what do I need to do to fix the vulnerability, and automating all this process, you'll be able to shorten the time from the time that the vulnerability is weaponized all the way until you can actually patch it. Because now you automate all the process. You don't have to spend the time on the mundane task of figuring out what you have to do. You have just to make sure that the server is ready and you can test and deploy those patches. And with that, Jeremy, I will hand it back to you.
Sure. So the rest of the webinar here, the majority of it, I'm going to be talking about how do we take a lot of the great things that Eran went over from a technology perspective and implement it with a service provider in a really effective way. So the ways that we do that, we kind of bring our implementation and our steady state process in, and we start looking at these things for our customers, right? So let's talk about how they do it today, and let's talk about what they want out of a patch management service. A lot of times if they're managing, like Eran went over, what does a manual strategy look like? If you bring in the operating systems and you're talking about maybe multiple spreadsheets and then tracking which endpoints have been hit for which, patches, those kinds of things, I'm probably, tearing up either awful memories or current memories of how, people do patch management out there today. And a lot of times it just comes down to organizing different groups of machines, different OSs, different applications, and manually tracking how they get patched. And an error can be as simple as somebody accidentally making a line in a spreadsheet green instead of it being yellow or red, right? It's easy to do. We have a lot of humans in the process, and we have to be very, very diligent in order for those humans to get everything right? So that's the first aspect to it. The second aspect to it is just the amount of information that you have to kind of collate and make sure you prioritize. And that's where a service provider comes in, and they really provide a lot of value because we bring the expertise of prioritization in a vulnerability management solution to our customers. So taking the big chunk, the big volume, and breaking those vulnerabilities down, and bubbling those, like Eran mentioned, the low-hanging fruit, the patches that represent the most risk for the elite, the most security risk, and the least amount of business risk in order to patch, bubbling those up to the top and addressing those with automation strategies. And other patch management strategies where it's just in a cadence, it's regular everyday business, and it's business as usual. You get into a rhythm with a service provider, right? And the last thing is the time. Right. So, that's a critical functionality when we're looking at automation candidates, is weighing the business risk of implementing the patch, right? Because whenever you change code, there's inherent risk to that, with the security risk of that patch being out there, and making smart decision on which families of applications to implement automated patching for, right? So those are the things that we like to weigh in mind when we kind of implement our patch management solution service with our customers. The ways that we like to get in and kind of break down how we make that decision and where we put patches in our program to get remediated with our customers is we break it down into application patching or OS level patching is kind of a first category that we'll talk about. So application-based patching are those Chromes, those Firefoxes, those Apple iTunes, all the different applications that are out there that need to be picked up and patched and are commonly exploited. Those a lot of times will have a different patch management strategy than the native OS patching, where a lot of times IT teams, especially for those medium and smaller size organizations, IT teams are really up on the OS level patching, the Windows patching, right? Because of tools like SCCM and tools that are readily available out there. But with a manual patching strategy, a lot of times application patching is a manual strategy where they have to go in and either flush out a script with an RMM, or it's a custom solution every time. And what we try to do is say, hey, there's a better way to do that. We can come in and either automate those things or slide those into a patch package, which I'll talk about what that concept is a little bit later, but we can slide that into our process and make sure it's accounted for in a quick way, right? So the first thing that you kind of need to do is break down your patches, categorize them, and then slide them into the patch management strategy that you're going to implement with a service provider. The next thing that you want to go in and kind of take a look at is when you sign on for a service and when you use something to supplement maybe an existing patch management strategy, and you want to make sure that it's addressing the need that you meant it to address, right? So the value that these solutions can bring to the table is giving you a better idea of your asset inventory. So a lot of times what we see when we come into customers for the very first time is we'll blanket the customer, and we'll start to get a more accurate asset inventory in both terms of software inventory and the vulnerabilities that are out there. for the agents that we are doing the vulnerability and patch management on, as well as the vulnerabilities that we see out there in the network at large, we'll start to get a better asset inventory than a lot of times they've ever had in the past, right? So knowing what vulnerabilities are out there, and then the ability to gain the authority to make the updates to that is part of the kind of that discovery process when you come into a new organization and try to implement a really strong patch management process. The next thing that we do with our customers is we like to categorize those endpoints. And this gets to a few of the points that Eran was talking earlier. The reason you want a really good categorization system for your endpoints is you want to be able to say which endpoints are candidates for maybe automation, which endpoints, there's more business risk to touching those. And you want to have a good system to break those down so you can say, hey, the security risk outweighs the business risk for these, but not necessarily for this other group over here. And you can start to treat those differently depending on your appetite and depending on how you want to kind of customize the solution to fit your needs. Now, the importance of what a service provider brings to the table in that aspect is providing a good system for that works for a range of customers. So that's things like specifying dynamic tagging strategies with customers and kind of developing that implementation process to say, here are the endpoints, here are how those endpoints are going to fit into this patch management strategy via automation or via patch packages. And then making sure you get into a steady state where you have your applications that are patched in a quicker automated way versus having your applications where you build those into regular cadence that maybe go and change control windows, right? The third benefit that we bring to, kind of come in is we marry up the vulnerability data with the actual vulnerability fix, the patch, right? That one-for-one mapping is incredibly powerful a lot of times because it just yields the information that comes out of your vulnerability management platform. When you marry it up to the actual fix, it puts in stark contrast what you have done and what you don't have done very quickly and easily. And the ability to go in there and just ask, for whatever reporting data you need with a partner it makes things pretty simple. And it makes, instead of having to go in, figure out the technology, figure out the process, you have a partner to kind of work with you to do that in a system that works, that's kind of tailored to fit your business, right? And then the last thing is identifying the particular gaps. A lot of times what we'll find with customers is when we come in, there are subsets of the organization that maybe just get missed by the current patch management strategy. And that's okay, because that's usually what we're brought in to solve, right? So it's making sure we have a good coverage, we identify those gaps, and then we tailor the service provider solution to remediate the issues that exist in the current strategy. And that gets us into what is effective automation implemented by a partner as far as patch management goes. So part of the strategy there is identifying the applications that bubble up to the top in terms of the most security risk in patching, and then the least business risk in patching, and then developing systems with those categories of endpoints that you define early on in the relationship, and saying, here are the applications that we're going to target for automated patching. We're going to kind of have these run on a continual basis. And a lot of times what you do with those is you'll go in and you'll say, I want to target Firefox. I want to target iTunes. If you have a new patch out there, and maybe you're an organization where that patch is only going to affect a small percentage of the organization, but it still represents a lot of risk, you can implement an automated strategy to go out, take a look at that specific application, and for the right group, as long as it has the right tag on it, implement a patch automatically. But let's say there aren't circumstances where that always works. Maybe OS level patching or other patches where the business risk is higher. Then you have strategies where maybe you want to fit those patches into your change control windows. And that's okay too, because you have to kind of tailor the solution to fit the needs of the business at the end of the day. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll develop a cadence with our customers to say, Nuspire is going to go ahead and prioritize the patches that you have available, that we see in your environment that you need. And then we're going to put them into patch packages and develop a regular cadence, every 2 weeks, every, month with you, depending on the needs of the business, right? To go in, target a particular package that will then get reviewed and approved, give you the endpoints that the job will be scheduled on, and then we'll schedule those according to your change management and your business risk processes, right? So those are two sides of the coin, and you can do one or you can do both, right? You can use that strategy and kind of tailor it to fit your needs. And that's something that our organization will kind of help walk and tailor you through. And at the end of the day, the important thing that you're able to do coming out of this is get the data that you need to say that it is indeed working. So all of this data on the jobs that run, on to a per application and even to vulnerability and patch level is reportable. And you can, instead of having to go in, try to find the report, try to find the endpoints you're looking at, having to be responsible for all of that, it's a question, it's an email, and you send it off, and your partner is responsible for that. So those are some of the great benefits that we see in implementing this solution with our customers. That when you bring in a service provider, it really brings a lot of value, and it strengthens a lot of those processes by just giving that structure to the process, right? So the structure to the process, typically what we do is we roll it out in 4 phases here. So the first phase that we go into is we talk about, let's get your groups of endpoints, let's get your applications that represent the low risk from a business perspective, your automation candidates, and let's get all the information out there in an information gathering session. And then you go into the build, test, and deploy phase, where you take all the information that you gather upon, kind of the initial conversation. And usually what that looks like is a series of conversations with the IT teams to kind of develop the strategy, right? And then in the build, test, and deploy, you typically start targeting your first patch package along with your first automation round of, let's go out, let's target Chrome, let's target Firefox for your automated patches, right? And you typically run through that with a small group of POC endpoints, vet out the solution, make sure it works. And then from there, you widen the scope. So you get into that cadence, you go through that first wave, that first patch package, that first automation wave. And then from there, in the test and turn up phase, where you go through and you actually implement that pilot and you implement the bulk endpoints, you get the reporting for the first time. You can see the patch that was meant to be addressed. You can see that it indeed was addressed. And then from there, you roll into a steady state. And with steady state, what you're looking at is a regular cadence that you established earlier on in the process. And you're getting, the patch packages that are going to be implemented inside of your change control windows. And you're getting the list of the success or failure of the automated patching, which, you can keep an eye on, and your service provider can keep an eye on to make sure there doesn't appear to be problems with the effectiveness of the patch taking, that kind of thing. Those are all things that you can watch and kind of make sure you keep an eye on steady state. And those are the really effective, critical things that we make sure we bring to the table when we implement a patch management or a vulnerability patch management service with our customers. So that's kind of the spiel on how you can take this really, really cool technology and turn it into a business process and a service that works for your organization, and layer it over top, either to address gaps or to, come in and say, hey, this is a different take that we're going to have specifically on vulnerability related patching for these operating systems that we can use to take that mean time to resolution and shrink that down as much as possible, right? So that's kind of the take on how to take one of these strategies and use it instead of ripping and replacing your entire solution, your entire business process. You can use something like this to supplement what you already have in place and just make it all that more flexible. So the next thing that we'll go over here is the resources tab, and I'll hand it back to Gina.
All right. Thank you both for a great presentation and sharing your recommendations for our audience. I'm going to go through a couple of resources that I have to share and share some links with you. And then it looks like we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. If anyone has a question for our speakers, please go ahead and type them into the chat or Q&A tab. I'd like to quickly mention our next webinar on August 15th. This is always a popular webinar as our threat intel team reveals the latest data from Nuspire's quarterly threat report. I'll go ahead and share a link there in case anyone wants to join that webinar in the chat. Also, Nuspire and Qualys both have a vast library of cybersecurity resources available to you. Please feel free to browse those, and I'll put the links to those here in the chat as well. And lastly, if you're interested in learning more about how Nuspire and Qualys could possibly help you out or your organization, check out our recent press release and go ahead and reach out on our website. We'd be happy to have a conversation. There will also be a post-webinar short survey when you exit this webinar if you'd like to provide any feedback to us or request additional information that way. Sharing a link to the press release as well in our website. And from there, we can go into Q&A. All right, let's check and see here. Our first question is, what are the factors to determine if an application is a good candidate for automated patching or not?
Oh, that's a great question. So some of the things that we look for when determining that is kind of that weight and balance between business risk and security risk, right? So right off the top, a lot of the ones that we target are going to be those web browsers, right? I like the slide where Eran showed the CISA top, and 8 or 5 or 6 of those spots were Chrome, right? Chrome is an application where when you patch it, a lot of times the business risk isn't there, right? It's a web browser at the end of the day, and patching for a particular web browser is typically lower risk than patching for some other things. So that is a good place to target first. And where we go in with customers is we like to go in, target those first and say, hey, let's do a query to say, let's target Chrome, let's target Firefox, and we'll target those applications first. And then the other ones are the kind of those low-hanging fruit that a lot of times we'll see only 1 or 2 instances of the vulnerability that are out there. And with the way that you need to prioritize patching and what gets patched first, a lot of those vulnerabilities that are only out there in 1 or 2 places, but they are, they're still higher up in the spectrum of how severe they are in terms of vulnerability. Those are good candidates too, because you're looking at your Apple iTunes, you're looking at your other applications, which VLCs, which represent that lower business risk, but there might be less instances of them installed. So you're less likely to get them in regular patch management cycles because you're typically limiting your window of what patches you want to put in there to limit your business risk. So a lot of times what you'll do is just specify those particular applications. And even though they don't pop up a lot in a particular organization, they'll pop up enough to where you can have peace of mind, just know that when they do pop up, they'll be addressed with automation.
Thank you, Jeremy. Anything to add, Eran?
No, I think Jeremy provided a great answer.
Okay, thank you. Well, we only have 1 minute left, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. If we didn't get to your questions, or if you have other questions that you come up with, always feel free to email us at webinars@nuspire.com or contact us through our website at nuspire.com. Any closing thoughts from either one of you, Jeremy or Ron?
No, it was a great talk. Thanks, Eran, for joining us for this one. I appreciate it. And thanks, Gina, for leading the show here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, on behalf of Nuspire and Qualys and our presenters, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.